Some folks have tried to look at the election of President Barack Obama in an isolated way, but many say that his election really was a continuum in terms of the history of African Americans. A new book, frankly, deals with that, and the author here is with us. Peniel, author of the book, Dark Days, Bright Nights, From Black Power to Barack Obama. Welcome to Washington Watch.
Thank you for having me.
All right, first of all, the concept is interesting because clearly when you talk about President Barack Obama, you never hear the term black power being used. But really, when you think back to the evolution of the Black Panther Party as a political party, people forget that's how they started. They weren't walking around berets and guns. They were a political party in Alabama.
Absolutely. When we think about Barack Obama, one of the things that I argue in Dark Days, Bright Nights is that his legacy is predicated on not just the civil rights movement, but also the Black Power movement. The Black Power movement and its call for racial solidarity is really what got us our first generation of post-civil rights African-American leaders. Big city mayors like Marion Barry, Maynard Jackson in Atlanta, Kenneth Gibson in Newark, and also Harold Washington, who's key. Harold Washington is a Black Power mayor who's elected in 1983, and in 1984, a young community organizer, Barack Obama, really comes to Chicago for the first time and is going to come of age, political age, in Harold Washington's Chicago in the early 1980s.
Part of the problem, I believe, with the notion of black power is that people hear that phrase and they already have perceptions or misperceptions of what it actually means. And so let's deal with that. When you're talking about black power, you really had two particular viewpoints. It was Congressman Adam Clayton Powell who really coined the phrase, but most folks associate it with Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture. So let's deal with Powell's view. Powell had a different understanding of black power.
Well, Congressman Powell thought of black power as political power. The fact that black people were going to be power brokers, elected officials, corporate power. When we think about Stokely Carmichael, he was talking about social, political, cultural, economic, meaning that the grassroots would actually transform American democracy to the point where black sharecroppers in places like Lowndes County, Alabama, would get the right to vote and really upend Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, push that society further to the left.
And when I interviewed Reverend Al Sharpton about this for a piece for the power issue in Ebony magazine in January, and what he said that he felt that we are closer today to Powell's view of black power as opposed to Carmichael's view, when in fact some people believe that we really should have both operating at the same time. We've achieved political power, not necessarily economic power.
No, absolutely. They both need to operate at the same time. One of the things that I argue when we think about Barack Obama, initially when he runs for president, he actually doesn't have the approval of mainstream civil rights leaders. People like Vernon Jordan, people like Andy Young, people like John Lewis initially don't think that his audacious run for the presidency can work. I argue that when we think about figures like Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, they both believed in political self-determination. And even Obama, in his autobiography, Dreams from My Father, he talks about how Malcolm X inspired him. Malcolm X's ability to reinvent himself inspired him. Both Malcolm, Stokely, and Obama made pilgrimages to Africa. All three of them really believe in black history and read black history to try to reinvent themselves. So when we think about both Stokely, Malcolm X, Obama, they were always pursuing a usable racial identity. For Malcolm and Stokely, later Kwame Ture, that was a radical racial identity. For Obama, it's an identity that's really in the mainstream of American democracy, but really American democracy as defined by people like Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, and some of the most militant rights leaders of the 1960s.
Do you believe that with this post-civil rights movement generation, that they really don't understand the genesis of black power and how it still is important and relevant in the 21st century? What I mean by that is, if you saw the elections of these various mayors in 2009, had African Americans truly understood black power beyond Obama, had we turned out in the same numbers as we did November 2008, there would be a black mayor in New York City, a black mayor in Houston, a black mayor in Greensboro, North Carolina, she was in office, but she lost. The African-American mayor in Dayton. So truly you had the opportunity to have people running these cities if black folks maximize their political power to achieve economic power.
Absolutely. I think what Obama did in 2008 is really re-galvanize the black community, but also multicultural and multiracial communities.
But did he do it solely for him? Because I'm making a broader point. They turned out for him not for the other folks. So how does he harness that?
Absolutely. No, yeah. I agree with you. Okay. What I was going to say is that we have yet to see if this has coattails.
Right.
In terms of the social movement of the 1960s and 70s with Black Power, it was such a wide movement. Different individuals could take advantage of its coattails. Right now, with what Obama did in 2008, there was a social movement, but the goal was to get him elected. It's achieved its goal. So right now, we're waiting to see, does this have coattails for people like Arthur Davis in Alabama? Does it have coattails for different politicians who are trying to break the mold, whether you're talking about mayoral elections in Houston and New York, or even senatorial elections? You know, can we have a black senator in New Jersey, for example? People like Cory Booker, different black politicians who are trying to break the mold. So far, we're not sure if it does have coattails.
It's part of the issue also. You have individuals who are so afraid to even use the phrase because it carries a negative connotation. And so you won't hear people talk about what it means to have that black power. When you look at Maynard Jackson, I mean, this is someone, and I use him as a model all the time, who truly took political power and said we're going to maximize economic power, and created this whole slew of black millionaires that frankly all of a sudden have these various businesses. It seems people today don't even really want to talk about it in that way. It's like, shh, don't say that because it's all negative.
Yeah, black power, the connotation is with violence, with anti-white rhetoric, instead of political and cultural and economic self-determination. In a way, I argue that Obama represents a pragmatic, moderate strain of black power in the audaciousness of believing that he could become the first black president. In our contemporary context, people are loath to talk about black power in the mainstream, even though that's exactly what we need in the African-American community, but we need economic, political, cultural power that comes with self-determination. So really, Adam Clayton Powell and Stokely Carmichael's vision, a convergence of that is what's needed today.
Now, when you talk about black power, I'm going to deal with this whole notion of music as well, because obviously you had James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Then when you go into the 70s, you look at the music of a Stevie Wonder, of a Marvin Gaye. On TV One, we have a show called Unsung, and one of the shows deals with Donny Hathaway. You talk about his music as well in terms of speaking to the issues. Let's bring it present day. You don't necessarily have, I believe, in this generation, the same sort of energy in terms of black power that you saw in the early 80s with Public Enemy and other kind of groups as well. And so how does that play in terms of music, in terms of arts play a role in also sort of shaping the notion of black power in the 21st century?
In the 21st century, we'd be hard-pressed to find that music as mainstream as it used to be. Doesn't mean that there's still not these kind of artists, but they just don't get this kind of mainstream reception that a Marvin Gaye and Donny Hathaway had in the 1970s.
Last question on this whole notion of black power, especially looking from the past to President Barack Obama. Do you believe that the fundamental problem is the inability to truly mobilize? When people talk about Dr. King, he was a black power advocate, but they mobilized people to act. There seems to be lots of conversation about a need for a black agenda, but I keep framing that as meet, talk, disperse versus meet, mobilize, act. Is that part of the issue that you see as well?
Absolutely. One of the things we see with contemporary notions of black power is that Barack Obama is really the only black leader right now who can mobilize millions and millions of African Americans behind a common goal. You might argue Louis Farrakhan can as well. So when people talk about a black agenda, which I think is necessary, they need a social movement to have the leverage to get that black agenda across.
But mobilizing is one thing, acting is another. Yes, Minister Farrakhan did mobilize with the Million Man March, did mobilize with the Millions More movement, but the act part coming after that, that seems to be, I think, for this generation, the troubling part. If you look at Dr. King and to a certain extent the Black Panthers, they did take black power, they mobilized, but they also acted to achieve a certain result.
Well, they had specific goals. When we think about Dr. King, goals were Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, Open Housing Acts. When we think about
not 30 different things.
Not 30 different things. When we think about the Panthers, there's a 10-point program. When we think about even black power in the 70s, let's elect a mayor in Newark or Atlanta. Right now, this generation, after electing Obama, there needs to be specific goals.
I keep saying it's like, what's next?
What's next? So there has to be, that black agenda shouldn't be 100 item list long.
Right.
It actually should be 3 to 5 things that people can mobilize that they can all agree on.
That has benchmark, that has accountability,
Absolutely.
and then when you reach them, then you say, now we're going to the next thing.
Absolutely.
Folks, the book is Dark Days, Bright Nights, From Black Power to Barack Obama. Dr. Peniel Joseph, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you for having me.
All right.